Good afternoon, everybody, and first of all, thank you very much for coming today. It's great to see a full house like this. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're running a little behind, so we're going to kind of step this up and we're going to move on. My name's Edward Evans. I'm the Veterans Program Coordinator here at Lakeland, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce Ken Sharkey to the stage. Ken Sharkey is right now one of our counselors here on campus, and he's also a graduate of Tuskegee College. So come on up, Ken.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Dr. Brown, Dr. Bordner, to Lakeland Community College. My name is Kenneth Sharkey, as Ed had said, and I'm a counselor and associate professor here. Okay. I got here by way of Alabama State University, where I earned my master's. This is not working so good so far. And most importantly, Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, where I earned my bachelor's degree in 1984. I've always been proud of Tuskegee because she made me what I am today. She instilled in me pride. She instilled in me knowledge that puts me where I'm at today. And I gotta tell you that we're here today to celebrate Mother Tuskegee and another one of her graduates who may be a little bit more famous than I am. But first, I'd like to share just a little bit of history, okay? On November 4th, 2008, Senator Barack Obama of Illinois was elected President of the United States over Senator John McCain of Arizona. President Obama became the 44th president and the first African American to be elected to that office. I cried that night for me and for my parents who had passed and didn't get a chance to witness this. He subsequently was elected to a second term in 2012 over former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. Some people wonder why it's such a big deal. After all, he is half white. Well, it has always been said in the United States that you can be whatever you want to be, but until November 4th, 2008, Black people did not and could not believe that, not even halfway. On December 1st, 1955, after a long day's work at a Montgomery department store, Rosa Parks boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus for home. She took a seat in the first of several rows designated for colored passengers. At one point on the route, a white man had no seat because all the seats in the designated white section were taken. So the driver told the riders in the 4 seats in the first row of the colored section to stand, in effect adding another row of white section. The 3 others obeyed. Parks did not. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, wrote Parks in her autobiography, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. Thus, the Black seamstress from Montgomery, Alabama helped initiate the civil rights movement in the United States. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier when he became the first Black athlete to play Major League Baseball in the 20th century. He joined the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947 and was named Rookie of the Year that year, National League MVP in 1949, and a World Series champ in 1955. Branch Rickey, the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, knew there would be difficult times ahead for the young athlete, so he made Robinson promise not to fight back when confronted with racism. From the beginning of his career with the Dodgers, Robinson was tested. Even some of his new teammates objected to having an African American on their team. People in the crowd sometimes jeered Robinson, and he and his family received many death threats. In spite of adversity and limited opportunities, African Americans have played a significant role in U.S. military history over the past years. They were denied military leadership roles and skilled training because many believed they lacked qualifications and intellect for combat duty. Before 1940, African Americans were barred from flying for the U.S. military. Civil rights organizations and the black press exerted pressure that resulted in the formation of an all-African-American pursuit squadron based in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1941. They became known as the Tuskegee Airmen. Tuskegee Airmen refers to all who were involved in the Tuskegee experience, not to be confused with the Tuskegee experiment, in which the government infused syphilis into a lot of Tuskegee citizens to find out the long-term effect of syphilis in people. The Army Air Corps program to train African Americans to fly and maintain combat aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen includes pilots, navigators, bombardiers, maintenance and support staff, instructors, and all the personnel who kept planes and pilots in the air. The military selected Tuskegee Institute to train pilots because of its commitment to aeronautical training. Tuskegee has the facilities and engineering and technical instructors, as well as the climate for year-round flying. The first civilian pilot training program students completed their instruction in May of 1940. The Tuskegee program was then expanded and became Center of African American Aviation during World War II. The Tuskegee Airmen overcame segregation and prejudice to become one of the most highly respected fighter groups of World War II. They proved conclusively that African Americans could fly and maintain sophisticated combat aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen's achievements, together with the men and women who supported them, paved the way for full integration of the U.S. military. These are examples of the struggles and triumphs of African Americans in history. Not just black history, not just African American history, but our U.S. history. But let us not believe for one moment that everything is okay and racism does not exist. It still does, and I'm sure it will not end for a long time. But when it does end, it will be because we end it. Black people, white people, Asians, Latinos, males, females, young, old, LGBTQ, straight, it doesn't matter, all of us. In closing, I want to share a quote by Jean-Bertrand Aristide: "If one suffers, we all suffer. Togetherness is strength, togetherness is courage." Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Stephen Olowich, retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army.
Yeah, I'm retired Army. I'm sure the Colonel's very pleased to see the Army flag up here on stage. And any from the Air Force know who gave you birth. It was the Army. So, on behalf of the college, on behalf of Dr. Beveridge, the students, and really the veterans of our community, Northeast Ohio, I'd like to warmly welcome both of you to our campus today. Everyone's excited to hear what you have to say. I have a few words I want to share, a few words of gratitude, and speak a little bit about the Tuskegee Airmen, maybe bring it down to a personal level, and from a military context. Colonel Brown, we're very proud of your accomplishments in military career, and your educator's career also, and what you represent to our country today. We are all eager to hear what you'll be sharing with us today, maybe in the Q&A session. But you know, not only the adversity and challenges of being World War II pilot, POW, and how you overcame that, but also within America's struggles with a segregated society. My father used to tell me stories. He was an immigrant to the U.S. in the 50s, and he was in the U.S. Army. That's how he came over. And he was in this integrated Army, and he would tell me stories that when they transferred from Aberdeen Proving Grounds, his regiment, down to Atlanta, and I think it was Fort McPherson, how the regimental commander had his first formation and was speaking to the whole regiment, telling the soldiers, you know, now we're in Georgia, this, that. And then he told me that the colonel said, now for all you colored troops who are integrated, once you leave the gates of this base, there's not much I can do to help you if something occurs. Odd times, odd places. I spent 27 years in the Army. I'm glad it was an integrated Army. So for those of you in the audience, Ken spoke to the Tuskegee Airmen a bit and the designation of the Tuskegee experience. It was an Army Air Corps program to train African Americans to fly and maintain combat aircraft, but included pilots, navigators, bombardiers, maintenance and support staff, and instructors. And as I'm sure the colonel knows, for every pilot in the air, there's about 100 soldiers on the ground, fueling, fixing, repairing, and taking care of their equipment. Typically, when we talk about the Tuskegee Airmen, it usually revolves around a 332nd Fighter Group, of which the Colonel flew in combat, and the 477th Bombardment Group. Very successful units, although by the time the bombers were ready, the war was closely approaching an end. The history and exploits of these pilots, airmen, and soldiers are legendary and are way far too much for me to convey to you today. The film that you'll see will show some of it, but I would like to share a few words with you from the Air Force Historical Research Agency, written in 2016. And I'm not sure if you were part of this or not. I'll find out afterwards. And now I quote, "By the summer of 1944, the mission of the Tuskegee Airmen changed dramatically, as the 332nd Fighter Group began escorting heavy bombers, such as B-17s and B-24s, on long-range raids deep within enemy territory for the 15th Air Force. Flying P-47 Thunderbolts and then later P-51 Mustangs, high-speed long-range fighters with tails painted red for the group identification, the Tuskegee Airmen shot down increasing numbers of enemy fighters that threatened the bombers they were guarding. Enemy aircraft shot down bombers the 332nd Fighter Group was assigned to protect on only 7 of 179 bomber escort missions. Okay, 7 of 179 bomber escort missions. The group flew between early June 44 and late April 45 as the war ended. The total number of escorted bombers shot down was significantly less than the average number of bombers lost by the 6 other fighter escort groups of the 15th Air Force. On the longest fighter escort mission from Italy on March 24, 1945 to Berlin, now think propeller aircraft, Italy to Berlin, 3 Tuskegee Airmen each shot down a German jet aircraft that could fly significantly faster than their own red-tailed P-51 Mustangs. When the 332nd Fighter Group returned from Italy, it had proven that black fighter pilots could fly advanced aircraft in combat as well as their white compatriots or their enemies. Imagine that statement. Imagine that, oh, now they've proven themselves. Today's entirely different within the military. Many times here at Lakeland, I've spoken at veterans events and other events, and I've said in public gatherings that there are heroes among us in everyday life. Colonel Brown, not only did you survive the rigors of military training, combat, and time as a POW in Germany, you also lived through segregation, Jim Crow, and racism. In spite of these multiple obstacles that would level most individuals, you overcame with courage and vigor. You truly represent the best that America has to offer and serve as a role model for those in the audience and in our country. I hope the young people really can appreciate your sacrifices for our country. And I mean that, our country, especially as a veteran. There's much to learn from our heroes today, and I hope we're all listening. We need something to unify us these days, and I think, Colonel Brown, you can make that happen. We're honored that you and your lovely wife can be with us here today. Rarely do we have such true heroes among us at Lakeland. Thank you, sir. I'd like you to join me on stage.
Over there?
Yeah, I'm gonna take you all the way over there.
They think I'm too old to walk. Okay.
Greetings. And again, thank you all for joining us on this journey that we no doubt will appreciate by the end of this hour. It is certainly my honor and distinct privilege to have this opportunity to introduce the better half of the equation, Harold Brown's wife. And co-author Marsha Bortner. Together, this couple co-authored this masterpiece of history entitled Keep Your Airspeed Up, the story of a Tuskegee Airman. Among many of the luxuries afforded to our Women's Center, where I am a program coordinator, is opportunities to meet educators and enthusiasts such as Dr. Marsha. I am pretty convinced that for many of you in our listening audience, Dr. Marsha's contribution to this work will inspire past, present, and future generations for years to come as the story of courage unfolds. My introduction of Dr. Bortner came by way of international travel to China. Together, for 18 days, we became hand-picked buddies. And from there, we developed a friendship of endurance. During our many conversations and train rides in China, we got a chance to share, learn the China culture, and exchange many bouts of laughter and conversation. But most importantly, intimate details about family and education. What intrigued me most was her desire to pick up the pen and bring all the pieces of this great history together to give others the privilege to hear firsthand and read about it. Certainly, it is Harold Brown's life story, but she has woven the pieces together to tell the story. Without any further ado, I present to you the weaver of the tale. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marsha Bortner as she joins her husband to share this story. Thank you.
Let me extend my thanks to Mary. She probably has many stories that she wouldn't even tell you about our being in China together. We learned a lot about each other there. Also want to thank Morris Beveridge. Morris and I were presidents together. It's actually been 5 years ago now since I retired, but I think you are very fortunate to have him as your president. He was my favorite president because he always stayed focused on your community and the issues. We met a fair number of puffed up people in our time, and Morris was not one of them, so you're really lucky to have him. I met Harold over 30 years ago at Clark State Community College, and in fact, one other person here today, Jack Christofko, and I don't know where he is, but he also met Harold at the same time, and I think we would both say we were so impressed with Harold's style, his way of getting work done and having fun doing that. And at that time, he started telling us stories, and I kept recording them and getting oral histories and interviews. And then finally, when I retired, and Morris, this is what you can do when you retire, you can write a book. So it was a very interesting experience, and once it came out, it was published in August, and we have had quite a journey. We launched the book in Alabama, and if you read the book, you'll see that Harold's parents fled Alabama in the Great Migration, so they got out of Alabama. And so it was with a little bit of irony that we returned to Alabama to launch the book as the conquering son. So we wondered what his parents would have said about that. So and then we went on to Minneapolis and Atlanta. We're in Miami Beach next week. And of course, we're here with you today. So we appreciate your warm welcome. What's going to happen now is I'm going to start a 15-minute video that gives you an overview of Harold's life, because people tend to focus on the 3 years he was in World War II, but he actually was in the Air Force for 23 years, and part of that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was in the Strategic Air Command, and then he went on to be a two-year college administrator as well. So it kind of gives you the overview, and then we're going to take questions. So if you have questions you want to ask Harold, or if you have questions you want to ask me, we'll have a period of time for Q&A, and then we'll be back out in the hallway if you want to get a book. So thank you so much for having us here today. We really appreciate the warm welcome and the crowd of people who are here. So I'm going to start the movie, I think.
The story of my parents is a rather interesting one. People who have come from Alabama, my father from Jennifer, Alabama, who migrated finally up to Talladega, and then my mother, who was born and raised in Talladega, Alabama. It wasn't the best place to live as you reflect back over those years, with segregation being by tradition and by law. There was every reason to get out of there. And many of them did. The Great Migration, numerous people left the South for the North, looking for a better place to live and a better life. I was 16 years old and a junior in high school, and I managed to save up $35, which was a lot of money. And I got my Uncle Cozell to take me out to Woodward Chamberlain, and I went out with my $35 to one of the little fixed base operators and said, I want to take flying lessons. And when my mother heard about what I had done with my money, she just almost went berserk. What? You spent all that hard-earned money doing what? Taking flying lessons? You threw it away? No, Mom, this is what I want to do. So Dad came to my rescue and said, no, it's his money. He worked hard for it. That's where he wants to spend it. But I do remember that, and I'll probably always remember taking those first 5 flying lessons. And those was in the days when you hear a little Piper Cub, putting along, and everybody would look up and watch it. Oh, there goes an airplane. Matter of fact, the kids used to tease me and call me Lindbergh when I used to talk about flying. And they always said, well, they won't even let you wash an airplane, let alone fly an airplane. But I always took that as no. By the time I'm ready, everything will have changed. And that's precisely the way it worked out. Everything has changed. I got myself in trouble with the Me-262 jet, which I should have stopped, turned around and went home, but the exuberance of youth. I had that 262 in my gun sight, and I just could not break off. No way. Well, long story short, I wound up trying to get back home, fuel exhausted, and run out of fuel, 25,000 feet, and the engine quits. I did spot an old abandoned landing strip. And to my horrors, after I had made my decision and got reasonably close, looking a little closer at the strip, it had been made inoperative. So a 4,000 strip with a great big ditch in the center now becomes 2,000 feet runway. And it's bad enough trying to land a 51 death stick on a 4,000 foot. But now I either had to do it on the first 2,000 feet or the second 2,000 feet. And that was rather interesting. Well, I landed on the 2,000 feet, bellied it in, tore the airplane to pieces, but I jumped out of it. Great landing, hero. I knew you could do it. Fantastic job. The one that probably frightened me the most was when I was shot down. So I was at low altitude and I was hit, and it soon became evident that the same plane is only going to fly for a very few minutes. That you were trained so well, I just did what I had to do, roll the airplane up, pop the canopy, pop the nose up, it throws you out, you pull the chute, and I did it just automatically. And but the difficult part, listening to those airplanes as the guys waved at me and went home. They saw I was okay in the chute. I was in that chute all by myself, and I landed. And I thought, what in the world am I doing up in Germany? 20 years old, looking like this. I've got no business being up here. And from that point, they took me back down to the village is where it really got interesting. And a mob of people met us. And there's no doubt that they had murder on their mind. There was no doubt about it. And they made certain that I knew what they were going to do. And I knew I was going to die that day. That was the last thing. I could see no way out. I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. There was no place to run, nothing to do. And I kept telling myself, I was actually talking to myself, to be quite honest, well, what are you going to do, Hero? Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, you got to think of something, Hero. Well, what am I going to do? You know, such and such. Let's talk to myself. And lo and behold, there was one good person in the crowd, a constable who was way in the back, who came up to the front, just casually walked up and stepped in front of me, put him behind me, and put a round in his rifle, and held the 35 or so people and stopped them from killing me. Now, when you stop and think about it, some of his relatives could have been in that crowd. He knew everybody in the crowd. He was just a constable there. But he stopped in and said no. And they were arguing. I couldn't understand German, but I can understand the fists and boom, boom, and those kinds of signals. Extremely upset. But he kept them off of me. And we backed up into a little pub, threw everybody out, barricaded ourselves there. And after midnight, we left. He took me down to another little village and turned me over to a couple of soldiers down there. But for that 30, 40, 50 minutes initially, I just said, this is the end, Harold. You're going to tell me. So that was probably the scariest time I've ever had in my life. The big problem was to get from where you were shot down safely into a POW camp. If you can imagine that as being the safe haven, but it was the safe haven to get to it. And it took about 8 days because you're traveling with 2 soldiers, anything that is convenient, a bus, a train, what have you. And perhaps one of the worst things that happened to us while we were on the train, we were strafed by P-51s. And we looked up and said, oh, boy, our guys. And then we realized, my God, they're going to strafe the train. And for a moment, I thought about all the strafing that I had done on trains and how I wanted to get that locomotive as he was rushing like crazy, trying to get to a tunnel to get away from me. And that is precisely what happened with this one. I could hear him speed up those engines, and I'm saying, please get to go. And we were hiding under the bushes. You hear those 650 calibers going off. You can hear them just tearing the train apart. I mean, you're actually terrified. Fortunately, he reached the tunnel before anything bad happened. And but that was probably one of the other most terrifying things I've ever experienced. Now I was on the other end of it, and I was a guy being shot at, you know. The one I was in, each building had just about 200 POWs. And the big joke was, the first time I was integrated was in a POW camp. The Germans had no time for that kind of foolishness. We had Frenchmen, Canadians, English, Australians, and even Black Americans, all in one, and no one could care less. You know, everyone was trying to survive, and we did. There was a little Jewish kid there. He came up to me and he says, Harold, I'm scared to death. I said, what's the matter? He says, I'm Jewish. I said, well, if you keep your mouth shut, you know, who in the world will ever know that you're Jewish? No one will ever know. So he said, yeah, but he said, just cool it, you know, keep your mouth shut. No one will ever know. I said, no, I can't hide like that. And I pointed at my face. He says, oh, I'm sorry, here. I saw a little levity. You know, here we are, here POWs together. You know, a little joke. a little levity. Forget it, forget it. In our case, we were in Nuremberg, and the Americans were coming and getting very, very close, so we had to get out. They marched us down to Moosburg. Moosburg's about 30 kilometers north of Munich, and it took about 2 weeks. And there were 10,000 of us that walked in groups of 200 each, and there was a string of us, I guess, a mile long as we walked down to Moosburg. And you get to, in the evening, various farms and whatnot, they put 200 here, 200 here, it's a couple of guards, and you would just sleep out under the stars, which was really kind of nice. It was better than sleeping, behind that barbed wire, and it was nice. You had a certain amount of freedom. We went to a farm that we arrived at one evening. I was the young baby-looking one, and they would give me the cigarettes to go out and trade. So I go up to the farm door and knock on the door. And on this one particular place, this sweet little old lady came in. She had to be 90 years old. I can't speak any German. As I walked in, this sweet little lady looked at me just as strange. She came up and she touched my face just as gently as you could be. And she just looked, and she was speaking to me something, but I couldn't understand. I'm saying, 9. That's the only word I knew. And she obviously said, wait just a moment, because she had her finger up. And she turned away and she walked off. She came back a short while later with a little bag. She had potatoes, onions, a big chunk of meat in it, and she gave it to me. So I gave her the cigarettes, and she, no. I said, no, and I'm trying to give her the cigarettes. No, nothing. She wouldn't take anything from it. But I often wonder, what was she saying? What was going on in her mind? I might have been the first black person that she's ever seen in her life, and probably so. And I don't know if she was trying to rub it off or what, but I would have given anything to have known just enough German to understand what in the world she was saying. I'll never know, of course. But life was really good, when we were marching. But we went down to Moosburg, and they already had 15,000 prisoners there, and we were only there for about 10 days before Patton comes through and liberated us. And the war was over for us. I was in SAC right before I left the military, and I was flying the old 6-jet engine, the B-47. As a matter of fact, I was instructor pilot in the B-47. And the more I thought about it, I thought there's more to life than pushing a handful of throttles. And throughout my whole military career, I had done a lot of instructional work. I was an electronics instructor for a while. I was an instructor pilot throughout my whole career. So I was involved with this whole thing of training, instructions. And that's when I decided, no, I think I want a career in education. Not at the high school level, but at the post-secondary level. And that's what I did. I was in 1965. That school today is now the Columbus State Community College, which more than 30,000 students, and the largest 2-year college in the state of Ohio. But it all started right there. And I had a whole career with them,
That's great.
which was very rewarding. Oh, we were the best kept secret in the Air Force. No one ever heard of us. No recognition, no nothing. Weren't in any of the books. All of a sudden, people heard of us. And the popularity just continued, and it is still continuing to grow. Unfortunately, as it continues to grow, the number of us are dwindling so rapidly, there's no one left. And that's probably the tragedy, is that it waited so long. And we lost so many of the guys who never even heard about all this notoriety that we've acquired. Well, I think after they hear this story, the whole story, it has a great deal of appeal to it. Here you got a group of guys totally rejected, complete refusal to allow them to fight the war if they want to fight the war. There's just one obstacle after the other. They don't want us, okay. They finally start training us. Then we're down in Tuskegee, Alabama. Then there's all of the racial strife and whatnot and all the distractions going on down there. And then the CO of the base insists that this will be a segregated base, training black pilots, a segregated base. So all these obstacles, one after another, there was always something. When you look at and take all the lessons of the Tuskegee Airmen, all the things he went through, I can't think of a better example if you want to give a youngster encouragement and whatnot than to look at the Tuskegee Airmen, at everything they had to go through. But they all, rose above all of the obstacles. And now we're in some of the history books, which is a change, and that's kind of nice too.
Can you hear me? What do you think? Okay. Well, how about some Q&A? We can have some real fun now. Anything you want to talk about? Questions? My life? The weather outside? You name it. Oh, that's easy. If it's a prop job, you're talking about a P-51. If you're talking about a jet, then the F-86 is my favorite jet. But I never did go supersonic. I was just getting ready to fly the F-100, which was a supersonic. And I had to get back to my home base, and they couldn't get the airplane ready, so I lost my chance to go supersonic. So I never flown supersonic in my life.
What was your least favorite airplane?
No such thing. That's quite a question. And I think you know my answer before I ever say it. After what I went through, obviously they would certainly have all of my support. I know what it is to face a variety of things that just don't quite go your way. And you're constantly resolving problems. There's always something coming up. But when you think about it really, that shouldn't be too unusual. Life just isn't quite that kind. And regardless of whatever you do in life, you're going to run into a lot of problems. It just so happened that in my case, and in the case of women and some of the others, the problems just compounded somewhat. But you still face problems. Well, you have a choice. You can either give it up and forget about it, but I would suggest that you follow your dreams. If that's what you want to do, then allow that dream to become your passion. And if you're passionate enough and work hard enough and have a little luck, it always takes a little luck. Don't ever think you do it all on your own. There's always someone that will give you a helping hand. Then you can make the very best out of a bad situation. But hey, I support them all the way. I got to stop and think about that for a minute. And I don't mean that as if I'm bragging. I never had a problem. But I would guess, perhaps the biggest one, let's say, is when I first soloed. flying the old PT-17 Stearman, bi-wing, 2 open cockpits. And my primary instructor actually lived and was born right down in Cleveland. Mr. Cargill died about, 6, 7 years ago. But things had been going reasonably well, and we had landed, and we taxied out to the old taxiway, and he gets out of the airplane, the engine's still running, takes his chute, lays his chute down, uses it as a pillow, and props himself up. And I'm wondering what in the world was going on. I should have known. He says, you think you can fly this thing and get it back on the ground without killing yourself? I said, well, little dumb, 18-year-old, yes, sir, yes, sir. But as I started taxiing out, and with him not in that cockpit, it was a long ways from that second seat up to that prop. And I felt about as lone as you can ever feel. So I said, oh, come on, Harold, no big deal. You've done this before. So I took off, okay, and came around and landed and taxied back up. And he just looked at me. He was still lying on his chute. He says, well, you got it down in one piece. Good. He said, was it luck, or do you really know what you're doing? Well, what's the response, huh? Take it around and do it one more time. So I did. And after that second one, I said, I got it made, Harold. You know what's going on. But that first few moments when you are by yourself in an airplane for the first time, it's a little intimidating. And you sometimes wonder, am I really ready for this? Well, you soon find out. But that was quite a moment in my life.
We had worked with different administrators, and one could be kind of erratic in his emotions, so you never knew exactly who you were going to meet that day. And then Harold came along, and he was very focused on problems and solving them, but having a good time in doing it. So we had fun. He treated people with respect. He was just a role model, at least for me, of the kind of administrator I wanted to be, because I wanted to be taken the same way that I was taking him, as someone who was honest and forthright and trying to solve problems, but to have some fun along the way.
I was scared as hell. Matter of fact, you are absolutely terrified because you're so helpless. You're just there, and you're just hoping and praying that something doesn't happen. And anything that does happen, it's usually going to be bad. But it's just a terrifying moments in your life, and after it's all over with, I survived, Boy, that was the greatest thing that's ever been invented, the GI Bill. I got every one of my degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, all under the GI Bill. And I used that GI Bill when I wrote the last letter of my dissertation that was with the last hour of the GI Bill that I had remaining. I used every dime of it. We usually get, well, it's a question I hear quite often. Matter of fact, if you may recall, there were 2 Red Tail movies. The first one was put out by the HBO. And let me just tell you a few words about it. The story was written by my classmate and very dear friend, Bob Williams. He got out right after the war, Bob shot a couple airplanes down DFC and whatnot. He was living out in Pasadena, and he had a few bit parts in the movie. Well, he wrote his own experience. We all had generally the same experiences, but at the same time as individual, all of our individual experiences were very, very unique. So he wrote his, sent me a copy and said, here, will you please read it? You know, what do you think? So he did. And he named the thing The Ottumwa Kid. I said, Bob, this isn't a cowboy movie. We're talking about pilots. But that was just a little such and such. Bob wanted to make a movie. He would raise $500,000 and the cost of the movie would go up $1 million. And a good friend of his named Price said, Bob, you'll never get enough money to make this movie. I know someone up in HBO, let's go up and talk to him. So they did. They went up, talked to HBO, and they said, we'll let you know. 10 years later, they contacted them and said, we have decided to go along with the project. He gave them a $10 million budget and went to the Air Force. They got a field out in Oklahoma, and they made the first HBO movie, and it was called The Tuskegee Airmen, and Lawrence Fishburne starred in it. You may or may not have seen it. That came out in 1995. Now, the next movie that came out was The Red Tails, made by Lucas. Lucas was the big Star Wars, Star Trek. So he had this big, wonderful animation department. Several years ago, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were all up at Oshkosh. They invited some of us Tuskegee members up, and Lucas was on the stage with us. So we were kidding them, and I can remember saying to them, I said, boy, you sure made us look good. You know, you had those airplanes doing things that, fine. And he says, Harold, he says, I put in $57 million of my own money in this movie, and I had to get my money out of this thing. You know, so I said, hey, you know, I'm not criticizing. You made me look just about twice as good as I ever was. But it did follow general events. But then in each of those events, he kind of, you know, jazzed them up. Like the little young pilot from 2000 up, waving kisses to, come on, you know, give me a break. No. But it was a fun movie, and but it was still a movie, you know. Okay. Oh, yes. Well, in 1947, we were first the United States Army Air Corps. In 1947, we went from the United States Air Corps to the United States Air Force. In 1948, Truman issued his executive order 8809, which integrated the military. The next year, in 1949, we were all up at Lockbourne at that time. Those who had decided to stay in the military, of course, were integrated. And we went to the Four Winds in 1949. Now, there's very little doubt, or as you reflect back, I'm certain that history will say that that was done primarily because of the record of the 332nd Fighter Group. And of course, at the time, we weren't thinking about setting records. We were just a bunch of young kids wanting to fly and so forth. But as we became older and older, we recognized that, hey, we really did something pretty nice. And obviously, it's very expensive to have a white Air Force and a black Air Force, which makes no sense at all. And even looking at it from a very practical point of view, to save a few bucks in the budget, the best thing you can do is integrate, which is precisely what President Truman did. So from 1949 all the way up for the rest of my time until I retired, I lived in an integrated environment, except for the times when I ever left the base. But it was an integrated environment, and that was 14 years before the first Civil Rights Act was passed, which was passed in 1964. So I can honestly say, hey, we led the way, in a sense. Yes. Well, I shot at a few, but as far as I know, they're out lecturing to a crowd of about 1,000 people like I am. No, I was never shot, but I did have a couple narrow escapes. But then a very interesting thing happened to me. I came back from the war, 20 years old, spent the summer of 60-day leave in 1945, and my next assignment was down in Tuskegee. And I became a flight instructor down there. And while going through my training phase of becoming a flight instructor, I was flying the T-6, and guess what happened? I had a mid-air collision. Now, that was hairy for this reason. When I crash landed, I was under control, and I was in charge, and I was dependent upon me and my own flying skills. So I was reasonably confident, yeah, I could pull it off. Then when I bailed out, I was still in control. The aircraft was in trouble, I did what I had to do, and my shoot was a good shoot, but I was in control. When I had that mid-air collision, I was not in control. And that was just by pure luck or the grace of God or somebody, because we were coming at each other like this. And it was a very, very hazy day. And at the last minute, I had my safety pilot up in front because I was in the back of the T-6 flying instruments, and the other aircraft had a flight instructor and a cadet in it. So here they come, and at the very last second, my pilot snatches the stick back. He, by a stroke of luck, pushes his down, and our wing catches their rudder. That's what happened. The rudder goes off, they go to a spin, they bail out. We have a big gash in our wing, and Clarence Dart, who was my safety pilot and was in the 99th with me, we have a discussion because I was halfway out of the airplane. So I said, Dart, if that gash has gone through the main spar, there's nothing holding this wing on but the skin. And what happens if we get down on final, 500 feet, the wing falls off, we just bought the farm. Let's jump. That's the safe way out. Well, he talked to, no, so I give him back in, buckle up, and we landed the airplane. But that was just pure unadulterated luck that they went this way. They could have just as easily went this way or this way. So what makes that thing so scary is that that was just a chance happening, that instead we went in opposite directions, or else it would have been a head-on collision. And of course, I wouldn't be standing here today, I don't think, if that had happened. Okay? The last 2 months of the war, I had the war made. I was a flight leader, and I actually thought that I might make captain. But then I blew it and got a little too cute in the airplane and got myself in trouble. And, well, you know the rest of the story. Okay, well, the training program was the same for everyone. So we all flew the 17, the BT-13, and the T-6, and then we graduated. Initially, the plan was to have one squadron, which was the 99th Squadron, made up of 35 pilots and 35 pilots and 27 aircraft. That was first. When they completed their training, they then came up with the 332nd, because we were graduating a graduating class every 5 weeks. The program was 40 weeks long. So The 99th first went overseas, then the 332nd didn't get overseas until January of 1944. But part of us went single engine, which was fighters, and we fought the war. There were 992 of us, and about 380 of us went overseas to fight the war as single engine fighter pilots. The rest of the pilots stayed back, and they were multi-engine pilots. Matter of fact, they were training to fly the B-25, and when Davis came back after the war, he was getting ready to take them over to the Pacific area, the bomber boys, when the war ended and they did not get overseas. So just 380 of us went over to fight the war. Now there was a total of 992 pilots, Tuskegee pilots, but we had 14,600 ground personnel supporting us. So there was close to what, 14,600 plus another 1,000 or so. You were talking about 15,000 people, and we were all Tuskegee airmen. So you can easily see here you're supporting 15,000 in one Air Force and umpteen thousand in another Air Force. It makes no sense.
You know, could I add one last thing I've been thinking about? You asked the question about, in the Air Force, the acceptance of women and African Americans, and I don't have military background, but we were on Maxwell Air Force's base for an entire day, and I was so impressed by the diversity of the personnel. I mean, we were on the base, and Harold got 1,200 people gave him a standing ovation, but there were African American women in charge of all kinds of things, and I mean, it was just such a diverse experience for me to see the real Air Force and how it worked. And I actually asked one of the colonels, a black man, I said, do you see much racism? And he said, no. He said, you know what? We have a common purpose and we don't have time for that. So if you suspected a racist, you would confront them directly, and either they would, you know, get with the program or they would get out. And if you happen to listen recently to the commander of the academy, did you happen to hear that one where somebody wrote something like "Go home, nigger" or whatever? If you want to really listen to what the Air Force stands for, listen to what he said to the group of people who had just joined, and really was like, either get with it or get out, because this is not who we are. So I came away very impressed with the diversity of the American Air Force and their ability, I think, to protect us. So I just wanted to add that. Okay.
Go ahead and thank the president of the college, and he's going to say closing remarks.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. I could stay here all day and talk, but don't you guys have a job that you got to get back to?
All right, if everybody hold on for 1 second, I'm going to bring up Dr. Morris Beveridge. He's the president of Lakeland Community College, and he'd like to say a few closing remarks.
Geez, Ed, you got them all riled up, and then you said, oh, hang on a second, we got one more guy. Where'd all the kids go? We had all sorts of students up there. At any rate, they went to class, right? So when Dr. Brown entered the auditorium, I stood up and introduced myself, and let me just rephrase for you what exchange took place. I said, Dr. Brown, welcome to Lakeland. My name is Morris Beveridge, and I love your wife. Now, that last part, I hadn't intended to say it, just kind of blurted out there. So to his credit, he didn't punch me, but I wanted to further explain that Marcia and I have known each other for a number of years, as she had indicated. I first met her as president, but I got to know her as person, and it's that person that I fell in love with, because it is that person who made her such a great president. We miss your voice in Columbus. I'm delighted to see how you're using your voice today, though. That's just awesome. So thank you for coming. Dr. Brown, thank you for coming. Thank you. We do have some students that are remaining. Can I ask the students to stand up? If you're a student here or elsewhere, would you please stand up and be recognized? Awesome. And stay standing, please. You weren't sure if you were a student? Is that what happened there? Oh, I forgot. So, to the students, what you've witnessed today is something very unique. You've witnessed a piece of history. You've heard from what, by all accounts, would be considered an American hero. But most importantly, I think you heard what it is about to be a patriot. And what that is does not come with a uniform, it does not come with a rank, it does not come with a right. It is a privilege, but it is a personal privilege. And you make of patriotism what you make of it. And so my recommendation to all of you is that you buy the book. Buy the book. Free plug. Read the book, but understand that this is a book about a patriot. This is a book about a patriot couple, and this is a book about what it means to fight against odds and do something that people all around you are telling you that you can't do. That is, in my opinion, what education is about. When you receive an education, be it here, be it Terra, be it wherever it is about change, and it is about becoming somebody that you never thought you could become. And I think that Marcia and I probably reflect that in our own personal lives. Dr. Brown obviously reflects that in his professional life as well as his personal accomplishments. It is our delight to have had the two of you here today. What a phenomenal story. And on behalf of the students who are here today and the college community at large, thank you for sharing both of your stories with us. Thank you.